Harkin emerged as the shining light, and the Bahraini government stopped talking to the oil company they had been talking to and brought in Harkin. And they signed an exclusive deal with Harkin, which was the first time an Arab country had signed an exclusive agreement with any oil company. This was unheard of. And the fact they signed it with Harkin was amazing because a lot of it was offshore drilling. Harkin had never done any offshore drilling. In fact, Harkin had never operated anywhere outside of the Texas-Oklahoma circle, and suddenly found themselves with this very lucrative and lush contract, exclusive in Bahrain. And we all knew it was because a principal in the Harkin company was the son of the President of the United States. I had an attorney at the time in my own energy company who was a very strong Republican supporter, contributed a lot of money to the Republican Party. I remember him saying to me, "My gosh," he said, I hope that it's worth this president's while, the first Bush. I hope it's worth his while to see his son make a little money, because I sure hope it doesn't destroy the first Bush, the president's reputation, and make him lose the presidency just because he's trying to help his son do well in business." A little ironic when you look back at it now, and of course the first Bush didn't get reelected, the second one has. So those were very interesting times, very interesting.
What about the Bin Laden family? Was that something that you had an awareness of back then?
Oh yes, the Bin Laden family were very tied in with the Saudi construction industry. They owned the largest construction company, or one of the largest construction companies in Saudi and in the Middle East. And a lot of the work that was won, a lot of the contracts that were won by our big construction companies, like the Bechtels and Halliburton and so on and so forth, was subcontracted out to the Bin Laden people. So there was a very, very close connection there, extremely close connection between the oil companies, U.S. construction and engineering companies, and the Bin Laden group.
Do you know through your work as well if Osama bin Laden's work in Afghanistan when they were fighting the Soviets, was that a well-known fact at the time, or did that emerge later?
Oh no, it was very well known. Yeah, in those circles, and the people, yes, we definitely wanted to keep the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. That's a major corridor for oil from the Caspian Sea area. And one of the reasons that we're in Iraq today is because in the late 90s, in fact, under the Clinton administration, it became quite apparent that we didn't have the kinds of reserves of oil around the world, particularly in the Caspian area, that everybody thought we had. It became quite apparent that the oil companies were inflating their estimates of reserves in order to inflate their stock prices. Now, Enron was found out doing this, and WorldCom and several others, but the fact of the matter is most all the oil companies were doing it. And so once the powers that be, once the government became aware that this was happening, there was a huge concern that we're going to run out of oil. And, we're in the process right now, this global empire of running out of everything, including markets, because every other empire in history has had geographic areas to move on to. There have been new frontiers. Ours doesn't. We encompass the globe. We encompass all the populations of the globe. So once you've encompassed that, how do you keep growing those markets, especially if the poor are getting poorer? And they're one of the big markets. So there was this big concern in the late 90s as to what's going to happen to our economy. And a lot of it hinged on oil and the fact that the oil reserve estimates were all inflated. And so we realized back then, and again, this is under Clinton, that we needed to take control of Iraqi oil fields. We were also concerned that the Saudis were going to go under, that there was going to be a revolution in that country. And we needed to strengthen our position in Saudi, Kuwait, and Iraq, and hopefully, under the scenario, in Iran also. At the same time, Nigeria is resisting us, one of the other big producers. Venezuela, which has fluctuated between being our third and fourth largest supplier, was saying no. They elected Hugo Chavez as president. He's very anti-American, and he's saying, I'm not going to give you guys any more oil. And at the same time, all during the 80s, the economic hitmen had been Iraq, trying to convince Saddam Hussein to do the same thing that the Royal House of Saud had done in Saudi Arabia. We tried desperately to get Saddam Hussein to buy that same scenario that had been so successful in Saudi Arabia. He didn't buy. He wouldn't buy into it at all. And so in the 80s, we sent in the Jackals to overthrow his government. That didn't work. We sent in the Jackals to assassinate him. They couldn't get through to him because his Republican Guard, his security forces, were just too loyal, too strong, and besides, there were like 12 or 15 Saddams. You know, he had all these doubles. We couldn't assassinate him. So he provided a very convenient excuse, and I think we nudged him into it. He attacked Kuwait, and we were sworn to defend Kuwait. And had he got into Kuwait, the next would have been Saudi Arabia. So it gave us the perfect excuse to go after him. The economic hitmen had failed, the Jackals had failed, the next step is to send in the military. We thought we needed an excuse. He gave us the perfect excuse when he went into Kuwait. We went in, we attacked him, we essentially destroyed his army, but we didn't get him. However, we thought he had been sufficiently chastised that now the economic hitmen could win him over. So during the 90s, the economic hitmen went back in. Now, had Saddam bought the way Saudi did, we would have given him or sold him all the fighter planes he wanted, the missiles. We would have built him chemical plants and biological plants and nuclear power plants probably. We've done that plenty of other places. But he didn't buy, and he would still be president if he had just gone along with our system. But he took sort of the same sort of kind of a stance that an Omar Torrijos took. It was very independent, I think for very different reasons. I think Saddam Hussein was probably just plain crazy. I mean, I don't know why he didn't buy. I know why Torrijos didn't. It was very principled. I don't think Saddam had those principles at all. Nonetheless, he didn't buy. The assassins tried to get him again in the 90s without any success. And so, you know, once again, we sent in our young men and women to die and to be killed. And it's interesting to me that during the first Gulf War, at that time we were importing about 8 million barrels of oil a day. At the time of the second Gulf War, we were importing about 12 million barrels of oil a day. We'd increased our dependence on foreign oil by 50% during that time period, which is a little shocking and discouraging.
I think it's interesting that you were originally approached for going into Saudi Arabia by the Treasury Department, because I know that during the 80s, the transfers of military hardware that we did give to Iraq, and including what biological stuff they did have, went through the Treasury Department, funded all that. It's my understanding.
Yes, and I don't know about that specifically, because I was very seldom involved in weapons dealing, but it wouldn't surprise me a bit. I mean, these departments work very closely together, and it's always the objective to keep as much off the military budget as you possibly can, because everybody knows that, you know, people object to military budgets. You want to keep those low.
One of the things you point out in your book is, in addition to Iraq being on top of so much oil, is they also have a significant control over water in the Middle East.
That's true. Both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow out of Iraq. Iraq is a very strategic country. That water that flows out of there goes to the other parts of the Middle East, but Iraq controls it. Iraq could conceivably shut down that water by damming up those rivers if it really wanted to. And, of course, if you look at a map and you look at what borders Iraq, it's everybody, you know, including Iran, including most of the Arab countries. And Iraq is within easy missile distance of Russia and Israel. Iraq could send missiles very easily into all of those countries. And it's very, very strategic. It's been, in the days of the American Revolution, it was considered that anybody who controlled the Hudson River Valley would control the continent. And I've seen historians, modern historians, write the same thing about Iraq. If you can control Iraq, you can control the Middle East. Frankly, I'm not sure that either of those were true. The British did control the Hudson River Valley for a long time, and they lost the revolution. And I don't know that Iraq is really that strategic from that standpoint, but it certainly does have the resources, the water and the oil.
Let's talk about some of the other countries that you worked with in South America. Another person that you had a friendship with was the leader of Ecuador. Is that right?
Right, Jaime Roldos. first democratically elected president of Ecuador in many, many years. The country had been run essentially by military dictatorships, military and other dictatorships.